If you're trying to grow your agency and it feels like everything still depends on you, communication, daily tasks, fixing mistakes, answering questions, it's not a hiring problem, it is a procedure problem. Hiring more people that don't understand what they're supposed to be doing is a waste of your time and money. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create standard operating procedures that actually let you scale your company, not just documents that sit in a folder and never get used. If you want more clients, more sales, and marketing that actually works, you should subscribe because that's what all my videos are built to help you do. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why SOPs are so important. So a lot of people think that procedures are something you create after you hire, but that's very backwards. So you need to create SOPs before you hire. So when people join your team, they already know what to do without, you needing to step in every 5 minutes. You cannot scale an agency without systems. Not it's hard or it's inefficient. You are physically unable to manage, let's say 30 plus clients, 5 plus separate deliverables and multiple people all inside your head. Without these procedures, you become the bottleneck. Your team is always asking questions about how to complete services, how to communicate with clients. The quality of your work is inconsistent, and your clients are going to feel that inconsistency, and you're going to potentially have a very high rate of churn. And when you do have these procedures, all of your work is much more predictable, and your involvement in that work is optional and it is not required. And now you can use your time to make the hard administrative decisions that are required to grow your agency. So the easiest way to think about this is that when you're building SOPs, you're just creating a second brain for your business. The simple reason why you need to do this is because your working memory is limited, right? So humans can only hold a certain number of active steps in your head at once. And once you exceed that, you start getting all these errors, inconsistencies, and most importantly, decision fatigue. So instead of all these different processes living in your head, how to onboard a client, how to communicate with them via reporting, how to launch ad campaigns in your particular way, whatever strategies that you use, how to actually send those reports, how to communicate internally, how to update your team members, how to pass along tasks to the next person in the chain, these things need to exist so your team can access them at any point. So this is what turns, freelancers or solo operators into business owners and businesses into bigger businesses, right? So now your execution of your service does not depend on memory, depends on a system. Now we can talk about what actually is an SOP. So an SOP simply is a set of step-by-step instructions to help someone carry out a routine operation with the goal of achieving maximal efficiency, quality output, and consistency while reducing miscommunication. So now let's break all those words down. So step-by-step instructions. So not just set up the ad campaign. So exactly how do I set up the ad campaign? Routine operations. So SOPs are not for, one-off creative projects. They're for your repeatable processes. So onboarding, reporting, campaign setup, QA, communication, etc. Efficiency. So the goal is not just completing the task, it is doing it the fastest and most correct way. Quality output, 2 different team members should produce roughly the same result. Consistency, so your clients should not feel like work quality depends on which of your team members got assigned to their project. Reducing miscommunication. Now, this is a very big one. Most mistakes in agencies don't come from a lack of skill, they come from unclear expectations. Okay, now we can talk about the golden rule, essentially. So the standard I use for every single procedure that I create is that could I give this to my grandmother and she could complete the task with zero help? And that is in the most literal sense possible. So if someone has to guess on any step, they have to ask a question, or they have to interpret the things that you wrote down, that SOP is unfinished. A good procedure is going to remove thinking from the execution. So every SOP you create should also answer these questions. So who performs the role? So is this for an account manager? Is it for a media buyer? Is it for a virtual assistant? What exactly are they responsible for? So not the broad responsibility, what are the specific actions that this is requiring them to take? What is the goal or outcome? So when you say, oh, hey, was insert task done correctly, what does done correctly actually look like? And lastly, has every step been very clearly explained? So again, like we said before, could someone follow this procedure with no context at all? So let's take an example for that. So if your SOP says, send client onboarding email, that is not complete. Instead, you need to clarify who sends the email, when do they send it, where is the contact info for who they're sending it to, what is the template to use, what tools are needed to complete it, and what happens after the email is sent. And if any of those are missing, you will eventually find some inconsistency. All right, now we can talk about creating good standard operating procedures. So the first step is to standardize the format across your company, and of course for this one that we're working on. So you want to pick one structure and then stick to that. So do we use numbered steps? Do we use bullet points? Do we use sections with sub-steps? We just want to be consistent across all the procedures in our business. Now, the second step is to define the goal of this particular SOP, right? So before we write anything down, you need to ask, what is the exact desired outcome of this process? So for example, let's say the outcome we want is that the client receives the onboarding email and is added to all Basecamp, Box, Keep, and QuickBooks accounts. Now that is what done means. So when someone goes through this SOP, that is the result that we want. Now, step 3 is to choose the best format to explain it. So not every SOP should be just a bunch of text. You can use screen recordings, Loom videos, diagrams, and flowcharts. Just use whatever makes that task easiest to understand. Now, the last step is to break it down aggressively. So most people tend to write procedures at a very high level, but you need to go one level deeper than you think is necessary. So instead of upload the contract to CRM, you write, where is the contract located, which CRM, which field, what naming convention do you use, and what do you do if something within this procedure is missing. So the more you break things down, the fewer questions you're going to get later. All right, so now we're going to talk about a bad versus a good SOP. So we're going to use the example of onboarding a new Google Ads client. So a bad SOP might say, send the client the finalized contract, set up a kickoff call, and upload the contract to the CRM. Now you might ask, well, why is this bad? It sounds like we've described all the things that need to get done, but there's no location of the contract, no clarification on who to send it to, no email template, no references to the systems required to get it done, no guidelines for internal communication, let's say between the PM or the specialist, and no sequencing clarity either. So when does each step happen? So now your team is going to ask questions, they're going to guess, or they're just going to do it wrong. Now a good SOP might say, locate the client's finalized contract in the PPC contracts folder inside Google Drive, open the PPC tracking sheet and identify the client's primary points of contact, send the contract to those contacts using the onboarding email template labeled PPC New Client Welcome in your email templates folder, navigate to the client's Slack channel and send the onboarding message template to notify them that setup is beginning, tag the assigned account manager listed in the tracking sheet in the Basecamp task titled New Client PPC Form to confirm completion, and then upload the signed contract to the client's folder under Google Drive, Clients, Client Name, Contracts. So why does this work? So every tool is named, every step is sequential, no interpretation is required, and anyone can execute this in relatively the same way. And finally, we're going to talk about some of the tools that you should be using. So your SOPs need to live somewhere that is centralized and accessible to your team. So the common options for that are Notion, Google Docs, Google Drive, Basecamp, and Box. Now, the exact tool does not matter. What matters is that your team knows where everything is, that thing is easy to search, and it is easy to update. So here's what you actually need. So you need, of course, storage. So this is the single source of truth. It's not scattered amongst all these different tools. The presentation should be clear, so everything is easy to follow, not just giant walls of text. You need version control. Box does this very well, so you can update these procedures as processes improve, and accessibility, so your team can find what they need very easily. You can also layer in these different tools like screen recording tools, Loom, Tango, different task managers, ClickUp, Asana, and of course, some bigger internal communication tools like Slack. But again, the tool is not the system. It is about how clear your instructions are. That's what matters. Now, guys, if your agency feels like it gets more chaotic as it grows, that's a sign that your processes are not yet externalized. You need to turn your knowledge into something that your team can actually use to create consistent, quality work. If this helped, you should leave a like and subscribe. And if you want, comment down below what process you're trying to document, and I'll help you break it down.